Nobody ever talks to us. They abandoned us here. The words weren't spoken. They were signed. Small hands moving in deliberate patterns, invisible to everyone but Jake Morrison, the night janitor who happened to glance up from his mop bucket at exactly the right moment. The Grandview Tower lobby blazed with light and laughter. Crystal chandeliers cast golden halos over men in tailored suits and women in designer dresses. The company's annual charity gala was in full swing. Champagne flutes clinked, heels clicked against marble floors, and the air hummed with the kind of conversation that comes easy when success surrounds you. But in the corner, tucked between a potted palm and the elevator bank, 3 identical boys sat completely still. Dark hair, serious eyes, matching gray blazers that looked too formal for children. They watched the party like spectators at a museum, present but separate, seen but unseen. Jake squeezed water from his mop and felt his chest tighten. He knew that look, the expression of children who'd learned not to expect acknowledgement, who'd stopped raising their hands, who'd accepted invisibility as their permanent condition. The tallest of the 3, by maybe half an inch, lifted his hands again. "Nobody ever talks to us," he signed to his brothers. "They look right through us." Jake's hands froze on the mop handle. 23 years ago, he'd been a special education teacher at Lincoln Elementary. He'd spent 5 years learning sign language, working with deaf students, building bridges between silence and sound. Then Elijah was born, and Sarah smiled at him in the hospital room, and life felt complete. Then came the accident, the drunk driver, the funeral where he couldn't speak, couldn't cry, couldn't do anything but stand there while they lowered his 4-year-old son into the ground. Teaching became impossible after that. How do you guide children toward futures when yours has been buried? So he'd traded lesson plans for cleaning supplies, classroom walls for office buildings, connection for isolation. He'd chosen to be invisible. And now, watching these 3 boys, identical triplets, he realized, Jake saw himself reflected back. Not just his grief, but his choice. The decision to disappear into the margins of other people's lives. A woman in a red dress nearly collided with the triplets' corner, her laugh too loud, her perfume too strong. She didn't even glance down. The boys pressed closer together, their small island shrinking. "We should go," one of them signed. "Father said to stay, but no one cares if we're here." Jake felt his feet moving before his brain caught up. His wet mop clattered into the bucket. His work boots squeaked against the marble. His heart hammered against his ribs like it was trying to escape the cage of his chest. "What are you doing?" the voice in his head demanded. "You're the janitor. You're nobody. Stay invisible." But he couldn't. Not anymore. He crossed the lobby in 10 steps. The triplets looked up simultaneously, 3 sets of identical eyes widening with surprise. Not curiosity, recognition. They saw him the same way he saw them, as someone the world had forgotten to notice. Jake's hands trembled as he raised them. His fingers felt rusty, like a language he'd spoken fluently in another lifetime. But the signs came back, muscle memory stronger than grief. He waved, a simple gesture that transcended words and silence both. Then his hands moved. Hi. The triplets stared at Jake like he'd just performed magic. The middle one, slightly smaller, with a cowlick that refused to lie flat, broke into a smile so bright it hurt to look at. His hands flew into motion. "You know sign?" "A little," Jake signed back, his fingers remembering more with each movement. "I'm rusty. Be patient with me." All 3 boys sat up straighter, their bodies animated in a way they hadn't been moments before. They signed rapidly, overlapping each other, their excitement making their hands blur. "Slow down," Jake signed, laughing despite himself. "One at a time. What are your names?" The tallest pointed to himself. "Mason." Then to the middle one, "Riley." Finally to the smallest, who had been silent until now. "Evan." "I'm Jake." "You work here?" Mason signed. "I clean here, after everyone goes home." "You're here now," Riley observed. "Special occasion," Jake signed. "Big party means big mess." "They need me early." Evan, the quiet one, had been studying Jake's face with an intensity that made him want to look away. Finally, the boy signed, "Why did you come over?" The question landed like a stone in still water, ripples spreading outward. Jake could feel the weight of it, the real question beneath the surface. "Why did you see us when no one else does?" "Because," Jake signed slowly, choosing his words carefully, "I know what it feels like to be invisible." The boys exchanged glances, some silent communication passing between them that only triplets could understand. Then Mason signed, "Are you invisible too?" Before Jake could answer, a voice cut through the moment like a knife through silk. "What are you doing talking to them?" Jake turned to find a man standing 3 feet away, tall, expensively suited, with the kind of face that graced business magazines and conference posters. His expression was sharp, guarded, almost accusatory, but his eyes betrayed something else entirely: fear. "Mr. Carter," Jake said, recognizing Ethan Carter, CEO of Carter Enterprises, owner of this building and employer of the 700 people currently celebrating in this lobby. "I was just talking to my sons." Ethan's voice carried an edge that made several nearby guests glance over. "I saw." Jake straightened, his janitorial uniform suddenly feeling like armor that was too thin. "Yes, sir. I apologize if I overstepped. No one talks to them." Ethan's tone softened, but somehow that made it worse. "People usually don't even look at them. I didn't think—" He trailed off, glancing at the triplets, who had gone still again, their earlier animation draining away. "I didn't think anyone would." The confession hung in the air between them. Jake studied the CEO, this man who had everything and nothing, whose wealth could buy anything except the one thing his children needed most. Understanding flickered in Jake's chest, unwelcome and uncomfortable. "They're good kids," Jake said quietly. "They are." Ethan's jaw tightened. "They're the best kids. They're just different, and people don't know how to handle different." "We're standing right here," Mason signed sharply, his hands moving with barely contained frustration. "We can see you talking about us." Ethan flinched. He couldn't understand the signs, but he understood the body language, the anger, the hurt, the resignation of children who'd been discussed, but never included. "What did he say?" Ethan asked Jake. Jake hesitated, caught between the father and the sons, between the powerful and the powerless. Then he made his choice. "He said they're standing right here. They can see you talking about them." Ethan's face went pale. He looked at his sons, really looked at them, and Jake watched something crack in the CEO's carefully constructed armor. A hairline fracture that might, with enough pressure, split wide open. "I don't understand them," Ethan said, so quietly Jake almost didn't hear. "I've hired the best tutors, the finest interpreters, but I don't understand them. And they don't understand me. We live in the same house and we might as well be on different planets." The triplets watched their father with expressions Jake couldn't quite read. Hope mixed with skepticism, love tangled with resentment. "You could learn," Jake heard himself say. "Sign language. You could learn their language." Ethan looked at him like he'd suggested flying to the moon. "I don't have time to." "You don't have time not to," Jake interrupted, surprising himself with his boldness. "With respect, sir, these boys aren't going to wait forever for you to show up." The words landed like punches. Ethan's expressions cycled through anger, denial, and finally, devastatingly, acceptance. "I wouldn't know where to start." Jake glanced at the triplets, who were watching this exchange with barely concealed desperation. They'd probably witnessed versions of this conversation a dozen times. Their father talking about them, around them, but never to them. "I could teach you," Jake said. "The basics, at least. Enough to start bridging the gap." Ethan stared at him. "You do that? For them?" Jake looked at Mason, Riley, and Evan. "Yes." Riley's hands moved tentatively. "Really? Father will learn to talk to us?" Jake nodded, then signed back. "He wants to. He just needs help learning how." The hope that bloomed on the triplets' faces was almost too much to bear. 3 weeks passed like water through cupped hands. Present one moment, gone the next. Jake showed up every evening at 6 p.m. sharp, after the executives left but before the night shift began. Ethan would be there, tie loosened, sleeves rolled up, looking more like a student than a CEO worth $50 million. They met in conference room C on the 14th floor, windows overlooking the city lights, and Jake taught Ethan Carter the language of his sons. At first, it was painful to watch. Ethan's hands were too stiff, his movements too careful. He treated each sign like a business transaction, precise, calculated, controlled. But sign language isn't a business negotiation. It's fluid, emotional, alive. "You're thinking too much," Jake said during their 4th session, watching Ethan butcher the sign for love by making it look like he was having a heart attack. "This isn't a contract you're signing. It's a conversation you're having." "I'm not good at this," Ethan admitted, frustration creasing his forehead. "You're learning. That's what matters." But learning wasn't the real struggle. The real struggle happened every time Ethan went home to his penthouse apartment, where his 3 sons ate dinner in silence while he worked through emails on his phone, where they did homework at the kitchen table while he took conference calls in his office, where they existed in the same space without ever truly connecting. "I saw them today," Ethan said one evening, his voice hollow. "Really saw them. They were in the living room, signing to each other, laughing about something. I have no idea what. For all I know, they could have been talking about me, and I wouldn't understand a word." Jake set down the flashcards they'd been using. "Did you try to join them?" "No." Ethan's confession was barely a whisper. "I stood in the doorway and watched like a stranger in my own home. What kind of father does that make me?" The question lingered between them, heavy with self-recrimination. Jake thought about Elijah, about all the moments he'd taken for granted when his son was alive, the bedtime stories he'd rushed through because he was tired, the playground trips he'd canceled because of work, the 1,000 small ways he'd chosen everything else over presence. "It makes you human," Jake said finally, "and it makes you someone who still has time to change. I don't know if I can. The company will be fine without you for an extra hour each day. Your sons won't." Jake's voice was sharper than he intended. "I lost my son when he was 4 years old. Drunk driver ran a red light. I'd give anything for one more conversation with him. You have 3 sons who are right there waiting for you to talk to them. Don't waste it." Ethan went very still. "I'm sorry. I didn't know." "Why would you? I'm just the janitor." Jake stood, gathering his teaching materials. "But that's exactly why I understand what your boys are feeling. Because I know what it's like to be invisible, and I know what it costs." The next evening, Ethan showed up to their lesson with the triplets in tow. "We're doing this together," he announced. And Jake saw Mason, Riley, and Evan exchange surprised glances. "If I'm going to learn your language, you're going to teach me. All of us, as a family." What happened next was something Jake would remember for the rest of his life. Slowly, awkwardly, with the triplets correcting their father's handshapes and giggling at his mistakes, the Carter family began to communicate. Not perfectly, not fluently, but honestly. Ethan learned that Mason wanted to be an architect, that Riley was terrified of thunderstorms but loved drawing comic books, that Evan, the quietest one, dreamed of teaching other deaf children sign language someday so they'd never feel alone. And the boys learned that their father wasn't absent because he didn't love them. He was absent because he didn't know how to show it. That his long hours weren't rejection but fear. That he was just as lost as they were, standing on his own island of isolation. On the 5th week, Jake arrived for their session to find Ethan already there, signing with his sons. Not perfectly. His movements were still stiff, his grammar questionable, but he was trying. The triplets were patient, correcting him gently, smiling when he got it right. Jake stood in the doorway, unnoticed, and felt tears prick his eyes. This was what he'd lost, what he'd given up when he chose invisibility over connection. But watching the Carters find each other, he realized something profound. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone isn't something you have. It's something you help them discover in themselves. Jake! Riley spotted him first, waving enthusiastically. Come in! Father just signed baseball, but it looked like bathroom. We're dying laughing. Jake laughed, joining them at the conference table. Ethan looked up, sheepish and more human than Jake had ever seen him. I'm getting better, Ethan signed, the movement slow but sincere. Right? You're trying, Mason signed back. That's what matters. But Jake's sense of peace shattered when Ethan's phone buzzed. Once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. The CEO glanced at it, and his expression darkened. What is it? Jake asked. The charity gala. The final one of the year. It's in 2 days. Ethan's hands clenched into fists. My PR team wants me to bring the boys, make a speech about family and inclusion. They want to... He trailed off, unable to finish. Use us, Mason signed flatly. They want to use us to make you look good. Ethan clearly didn't understand the signs, but he understood the look on his son's face. I told them no. I'm not putting you through that again. Again? Jake asked. Ethan's jaw tightened. Last year, they convinced me to have the boys on stage, stand there while I talked about charitable giving and supporting special needs communities. They couldn't understand a word I said. They just stood there like props while everyone applauded. It was... His voice broke. It was the worst thing I've ever done to them. The room fell silent. Then Evan, who rarely initiated conversation, signed something that made Jake's breath catch. What if we went, but this time Father could actually talk to us? What if people saw us as real, not props? The audacity of it hung in the air like a dare. Are you sure? Jake signed to Evan. That's a lot of pressure. We're tired of hiding, Evan signed back. And we're tired of Father hiding from us. Jake turned to Ethan. He says they want to go, but this time they want you to really see them, to show everyone else how. Ethan looked at his sons, his brave, patient, incredible sons, and nodded slowly. Then we'll do it together, as a family. But as Jake left the building that night, he couldn't shake a feeling of dread settling in his chest. In 2 days, the Carters would stand in front of 500 people, exposed and vulnerable. He just prayed they were ready for what came next. The night before the gala, Jake couldn't sleep. He lay in his small apartment, staring at the ceiling, and wondered if he'd made a terrible mistake, encouraging Ethan to expose his family's vulnerabilities to a room full of strangers. What had he been thinking? But then he remembered Evan's signs. We're tired of hiding. Maybe hiding was the real mistake. Maybe invisibility wasn't safety. It was just a slower death. Jake arrived at the conference room at 5 p.m., an hour before their scheduled session. He was surprised to find the Carters already there, all 4 of them hunched over flashcards and video tutorials on Ethan's tablet. You're early, Jake observed. We're nervous, Riley signed. Father keeps messing up proud and sorry. Ethan looked up, exhausted but determined. If I'm going to do this, I need to do it right. Show me again, Jake. Everything, from the beginning. For the next 3 hours, they practiced. Jake made Ethan repeat phrases until his hands cramped. He had the triplets quiz their father on vocabulary. He recorded Ethan on video so he could see his mistakes. And slowly, painfully, beautifully, Ethan Carter learned to speak his son's language. At 8 p.m., Jake called for a break. They ordered pizza, a CEO and a janitor, and 3 deaf boys sitting around a conference table, eating pepperoni slices and laughing at Ethan's terrible jokes that he signed with increasing confidence. Thank you, Ethan said to Jake during a quiet moment, while the triplets were absorbed in drawing comic book panels on the whiteboard. For seeing them. For seeing me. I don't think I've ever properly thanked you. Jake shook his head. You're doing the work. I'm just the guide. You're more than that. Ethan's voice was thick with emotion. You gave me back my sons. How do I ever repay that? You don't, Jake said simply. You just keep showing up for them. Every day. That's the payment. The next evening arrived too quickly. Jake wasn't invited to the gala. He was working class, a janitor, not someone who belonged in spaces like that. But as he pushed his cleaning cart through the lobby at 7 p.m., watching the elite filter in through the glass doors, he felt his chest constrict with worry. The Carters were in there somewhere, about to step onto a stage and bare their souls to people who might not understand, might not care, Jake! He turned to find Mason running toward him, resplendent in a tiny tuxedo, his brothers close behind. "Father wants you there," Mason signed urgently. "He said your family." "Please come." Jake looked down at his janitor's uniform, faded blue, forever marked with stains that wouldn't wash out. "I'm not dressed for—" "We don't care," Riley interrupted. "You have to be there. We need you." Something in Jake's chest cracked open, letting light spill into places that had been dark for 7 years. These boys, these incredible, brave boys, had just called him family. "Okay," he whispered, "I'll come." The ballroom was magnificent. Chandeliers dripping crystal, tables draped in white silk, hundreds of people in evening wear sipping champagne and networking. Jake stood near the back, acutely aware of his janitor's uniform, but the triplets had positioned themselves to see him, giving him thumbs up every few minutes. Then the lights dimmed. A spotlight hit the stage, and Ethan Carter, CEO of Carter Enterprises, walked out with his 3 sons. The applause was polite, expected, the kind of sound people make when they're supposed to be impressed but aren't really paying attention. Ethan stood at the microphone, his sons flanking him. He opened his mouth to speak, then stopped. He looked at Mason, Riley, and Evan, and something shifted in his expression, from CEO to father. He stepped away from the microphone, and he began to sign. The room went silent, not the polite quiet of waiting for a speech, but the shocked hush of people witnessing something unexpected. Ethan's hands moved slowly, carefully, forming words in a language most of the audience couldn't understand. But the triplets understood. Their eyes widened. Their faces lit up with joy so pure it hurt to witness. "I'm sorry," Ethan signed, tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry it took me this long to see you. I'm sorry I made you invisible. But I see you now. I see all 3 of you. And you are the most important thing in my life." Mason began to cry. Riley covered his mouth with his hands. Evan, quiet, serious Evan, threw his arms around his father and held on like he might never let go. The audience sat frozen, uncertain how to react to this raw display of emotion. Then Mason stepped forward, took the microphone with trembling hands, and spoke aloud, his voice halting, shaped differently than hearing people's voices, but clear. "My brothers and I, we've been invisible our whole lives. People look at us, but they don't see us. They see deaf children or problems or inspiration. But our Father, He finally learned to talk to us, not at us. To us." Riley took the microphone next. "If you want to help people, really help them, you have to see them first. You have to learn their language, even if it's hard." And Evan, speaking for the first time in public. "Thank you for listening to us, even though we sound different." The applause that erupted wasn't polite anymore. It was thunderous, genuine, moved. People were crying, businessmen and socialites and the mayor herself. But Jake only had eyes for the stage, where a father and his son stood together, finally speaking the same language. Then chaos erupted. A reporter from Channel 7 News pushed forward, camera crew in tow. She'd been invited to cover the gala's charitable donations, but she'd just witnessed something far more valuable. "Mr. Carter," she called out, "can we get an interview? This story, your family's journey, this is incredible." Ethan looked panicked, instinctively moving to shield his sons. But Mason touched his father's arm, signing something quick. Ethan read the signs, nodded, and turned to the reporter. "If you want to interview us," Ethan said firmly, "you'll interview all of us. And you'll provide a sign language interpreter so my sons can participate fully. They're not props. They're people with their own voices." The reporter blinked, surprised, then smiled. "Absolutely, of course." As the Carters were ushered toward the interview area, Mason broke away and ran to Jake. "This is because of you," the boy signed. "You saw us first. You made Father see us too." Jake knelt down, eye level with the 9-year-old who'd changed his life. "No," he signed back. "You were always visible. I just reminded your father to open his eyes." "Will you stay?" Mason signed. "In our lives? We don't want you to disappear again." Jake felt tears burn his eyes. "I'm not going anywhere." The interview aired 2 days later and went viral within hours, not because of the CEO's wealth or status, but because people saw something rare and precious, a family learning to truly see each other. The clip of Ethan signing "I see you now" to his sons was shared millions of times, spawning a movement of parents learning sign language, schools implementing ASL programs, and companies hiring deaf employees. But for Jake, the real miracle happened in smaller moments, like when Ethan showed up at his apartment one evening with a proposal. "Be our family's ASL consultant, full-time, benefits, salary, the works. Help us keep learning, keep growing. You can even go back to teaching if you want. I'll fund an entire program at whatever school you choose." Or when the triplets insisted on spending their Saturdays with Jake, teaching him their inside jokes and comic book plots, bringing him into their world with the generosity of children who understood what it meant to be welcomed. Or when Jake realized, 3 months after that first "hi," that he was laughing again. Really laughing, from somewhere deep in his chest, in a way he hadn't since before Elijah died. The grief was still there. It always would be. But now it had company, joy, purpose, connection. 6 months after the gala, Jake stood in conference room C, not as a janitor anymore, but as the director of Carter Enterprises' new special education initiative. His office was down the hall, with his name on the door and pictures of the triplets on his desk. But he still came to this room sometimes, when he needed to remember where it all started. "There you are." Ethan appeared in the doorway, Mason, Riley, and Evan trailing behind him. "We've been looking for you." "Are you hiding?" Riley signed teasingly. "Just remembering," Jake signed back. "Remembering what?" Evan asked. Jake looked at these 4 people, this found family that had pulled him back from the edge of permanent invisibility, and felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Remembering the night I learned that being invisible isn't the same as being safe, that hiding from pain doesn't make it hurt less, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is wave hi to someone who needs to know they're seen." Mason grinned. "That was pretty wise." "Did you practice that?" "Maybe a little," Jake admitted, and they all laughed. Ethan stepped forward, his signing now fluent and natural, the stiffness gone. The board approved the funding for 5 more programs: Baltimore, Chicago, Seattle, Denver, and Miami. Schools specifically for deaf and hard-of-hearing students, with full staff and resources. They want you to oversee all of them. Jake felt dizzy with the magnitude of it. That's incredible." "It's necessary," Ethan signed. "There are thousands of kids like mine out there feeling invisible. We're going to see them. All of them." Riley tugged on Jake's sleeve. "We have something for you." The triplets produced a wrapped package, barely able to contain their excitement. Jake opened it carefully, and his breath caught. It was a framed photograph from the gala, but not the staged professional shots that made the news. This was from someone's phone, grainy and imperfect. Jake standing in the back of the ballroom, in his janitor's uniform, tears streaming down his face, giving Mason a thumbs up, while the boy stood on stage with his brothers and father. At the bottom, in 3 different handwritings, the triplets had written, "The man who saw us first, our family, love, Mason, Riley, and Evan." Jake couldn't speak, could barely breathe around the emotion clogging his throat. "You gave us a second chance," Ethan said quietly. "Now we want to give one to you. Take this program, Jake. Help other families find what we found. Turn your pain into purpose." Jake looked at the photo, at his tear-stained face, at Mason's joy, at the family they'd all become, and made his decision. "Yes," he whispered. "Yes, I'll do it." The triplets cheered, throwing their arms around him in a group hug that nearly knocked him over. Ethan joined in, and for a moment, there were just 5 people standing in a conference room, holding on to each other and the miracle of being truly seen. Later that evening, Jake stood alone in the building's lobby, the same spot where he'd first noticed 3 boys sitting silently in the corner. The party was long over. The guests had gone home. The marble floors reflected the city lights from the windows, and Jake's footsteps echoed in the empty space. But he wasn't invisible anymore. None of them were. He thought about Elijah, about the son he'd lost and the sons he'd found, about how grief doesn't disappear, but can transform, like carbon under pressure becoming diamond. Still the same element, but changed into something that catches light. His phone buzzed, a text from Mason. "Movie night tomorrow? Riley wants to watch something with subtitles so you can't complain about our terrible taste anymore." Jake smiled, typing back, "I'll bring pizza, but we're watching something that doesn't involve robots destroying cities." Mason's response was immediate. "That's literally every good movie. You're hopeless." "Probably. See you tomorrow." Jake pocketed his phone and took one last look around the lobby. Tomorrow he'd start designing the curriculum for the new schools. He'd hire teachers who understood that different didn't mean less than. He'd create spaces where deaf children would never have to sign "Nobody ever talks to us again." But tonight, he'd just be grateful for the courage to wave high, for 3 boys who waved back, for a father who learned to speak a new language, for second chances and found families, and the revolutionary act of truly seeing another person. Jake walked toward the exit, his reflection following him across the marble. No longer invisible, no longer hiding, no longer alone. Behind him, the lights in conference room C stayed on, a beacon for anyone who needed to know they were seen. Have you ever felt invisible? Have you ever sat in a crowded room and felt completely alone? Have you ever wanted to reach out but convinced yourself you didn't matter enough to try? Jake Morrison did. So did Mason, Riley, and Evan Carter. But one simple gesture, one wave, one hi, changed everything. This story isn't just about a janitor and a CEO's sons. It's about all of us. About the people we walk past every day without seeing. About the connections we could make if we just had the courage to wave. What would you do if you had the chance to change someone's life? The truth is, you do have that chance. Every single day. In the coffee shop where the barista looks exhausted. In the office where the new employee sits alone at lunch. In your own home where someone might be waiting for you to really see them. Being seen isn't a luxury. It's a fundamental human need. And giving someone the gift of visibility costs nothing except a moment of courage. This story could be your story. Maybe you're Jake, feeling invisible, grieving something you've lost, wondering if connection is possible anymore. Maybe you're Ethan, so consumed by success that you've forgotten what really matters. Maybe you're Mason, Riley, or Evan, waiting for someone to learn your language to meet you where you are. Whoever you are, know this. You matter. You are seen. And you have the power to see others. If this story touched your heart, don't let it end here. Subscribe to our channel for more stories of hope, redemption, and the extraordinary things that happen when ordinary people choose courage over comfort, when they choose connection over isolation, when they choose to wave high instead of walking past. Join our community of people who believe in second chances, in found families, in the transformative power of really seeing another human being. Because nobody should ever have to sign, "Nobody talks to us." Because everyone deserves to be visible. Because sometimes, all it takes is one person brave enough to wave. Subscribe now. Be that person. Change someone's life. And maybe, in the process, you'll find that you've changed your own.